Welcome back to another episode of Writers Talk, the show where we dive deep into the minds of today's most exciting storytellers. I'm your host, Janae, and today we have a truly fascinating guest joining us. Imagine a world where an ancient Hebrew mysticism collides with the neon lit streets of New York City, where secret orders of demon hunters wield divine magic, and where one college student must embrace his heritage to protect the world from an ancient evil. That's exactly what today's book delivers, a modern fantasy that weaves faith, history, and high stakes adventure into one incredible story. Our guest today is J.S. Gold, the brilliant mind behind Sanhedrin Chronicles. We'll be talking about the inspiration behind the unique blend of fantasy and folklore, the process of building a rich magical system rooted in Hebrew tradition, and what it means to write about faith and identity in a modern world setting. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into the magic of storytelling. JS, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I was just saying before we came on that I'm very excited to be here. Always happy to talk shop and talk about the ins and outs of being an author, a storyteller. It's a very, very exciting opportunity. So thank you for having me.
That's okay. Okay. What was the initial spark that inspired you to write this story?
Sure. So in 2018, Black Panther hit theaters, and it was a bombshell of a movie, to put it mildly. It took the world by storm, made $1 billion, and what I loved about it is, of course, it forwarded themes that run through the Black community, not only within the United States but across the world, across the Black diaspora. It was a hero that galvanized an entire community. And when I thought about my own community, which is the Jewish one, Jewish American, to be specific, I didn't really see that character for my people, for my community. There are, of course, Jewish superheroes. The most notable ones are like Magneto from the X-Men, The Thing from the Fantastic Four. So it's not like Jewish representation isn't there, hadn't been there. But I hadn't seen a story that forwarded Jewish themes in quite the same way as Black Panther forwarded its Black ones. I wanted to have questions about what it meant to be Jewish in the same vein about, for Black Panther, that character had to wrestle with what obligations this Wakandan king had to a Black diaspora across the world. That's a very heavy theme. The divide and connection between Black Americans living in the United States and, of course, in Africa and elsewhere. I wanted those kind of heavy questions for my own diaspora and my own Jewish people. So that's when I said, okay, what would a Jewish superhero look like? What would a Jewish fantasy look like? And what was the shape of it? And from there, I started researching and diving right in.
Okay, what kind of research did you do to bring the Hebrew mysticism and mythology to life?
Yeah, sure. So there's a few different avenues. The first one is the history. Jewish history. So when you're in an American Jewish context for many Jewish Americans, when you grow up, it's basically the ancient times of biblical history. You learn about Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and Rebecca and all, the matriarchs and the patriarchs of the Jewish people and the Israelites. And then there's the destruction of the Second Temple, a very, very pivotal moment in Jewish history, and the Jews are scattered into this diaspora across the world. And then it's kind of like in the education for many Jewish Americans, it's like, okay, you skip over 2,000 years and we have the Holocaust. And it's like, okay, how did we get there? Not only in the context of Nazi Germany, but also how did we get there in literally the thousands of intervening years? What were Jews doing for the 1800 years from the destruction of that Second Temple to the Holocaust? So that was a rich exploration for me of filling in that gap. And then I went into the pardon the language here, but I went into the Jewish occult, the Jewish mystic tradition. Of course, many Jews around the world today are very familiar with the modern rituals of Judaism, lighting the Shabbat candles. You go to services every Friday night, and those are kind of the standard boilerplate ones. But there's a very rich Jewish mystic tradition that is kind of steeped in folklore as well, coming out of predominantly Eastern Europe for the Ashkenazi Jews, that is underexplored. I think we're living in a moment right now where it's currently being more explored, but traditionally it had been underexplored. Thoughts of demons, where does demonology fit into a Jewish worldview? Angels, same thing. Mystic medicines and healer arts, the ins and outs of scripture and the numerology behind the words in Torah and in other holy texts. It was really fun not only to uncover that history for myself, but also this mystic tradition, this esoteric tradition that kind of runs deep into through the history of the Jewish people. So those are the two lanes that I kind of went through.
Okay. What do you hope readers take away from Arthur's struggle with faith and identity?
Pride. I would say pride. I and that's not to say that Jewish Americans or Jewish people around the world don't have pride, because that's just not the case. But I think there is a very unique story that the Jewish people tell themselves throughout their history, and it usually involves resilience in the face of adversity. It usually involves survival. And those are major themes of my work. But I also wanted to infuse this story with not only my story, but the story of the Jewish people with an element of, and again, part of my kind of crass language, but badassery. Like, because when Jewish people think of themselves, and again, I'm speaking for an entire people, which is not always good. But generally speaking, I wouldn't say that Jewish people think of themselves as badass. It's not like the first word that comes to their minds, many of them. And so one of the things I was trying to do as a Jewish reader comes away from this book is think, what is badass about being Jewish? What can be cool about being Jewish? And it of course goes into those themes of survival and resilience and growth and vitality and all those amazing things that are part of the Jewish story. But the aesthetics of it, I kind of wanted to give it a facelift, and take it away from, we survived this, these old destructions, the Holocaust, the genocides, and more. We can be actually cool, like superhero cool, like flinging magic spells and pew pew. Like we can actually be that kind of cool too. It's not just the resilience. So it's kind of when a Jewish reader walks away from this story, that's what I'm hoping they feel is a renewed, reinvigorated sense of self.
Okay. The book blends modern fantasy with ancient Jewish mysticism.
Mhm.
Why did you choose to set it in contemporary New York?
That's a really good question. I actually wrote about this in a blog a few months ago, last month, I think, actually. So I'm going to answer that with a story. I went to the Jewish Book Festival a few months ago. It was in New York City. And one of the people who was on one of the panels there, this is a Jewish fantasy writer, which is awesome. Love to see it. And she was describing how in her Jewish fantasy, she didn't have the word Jewish on the page. She had a third world fantasy, a secondary fantasy, taking place in an alternate dimension. And she infused it with Jewish kind of religiosity, but she didn't call anything Jewish. It's a different world. So it would all be, instead of Jewish, I'm going to use the word like Muish or whatever. Okay. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't agree. I think we're in a moment in time where Jews need to be on the page. The word Jewish needs to be on the page. The Jewish identity needs to be more in the forefront and made explicit. Because I'll tell you from personal experience, anti Semitism is rampant. I think many people around the world are forgetting some of the lessons of the Holocaust. And there is certainly a feeling amongst many Jews that a target is once again on their backs, even in America. And so it was important to me to put the word Jewish on the page and to make that explicit so that when a reader is reading this story, it's in New York City, it's modern day, these are Jewish people. There's no hiding, there's no allegory, there's no, like, you are going to be part of the Jewish world. And I didn't want to leave, I know this sounds not very artistic, but I didn't want to leave any interpretation in that sense when I set about making this story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us can you tell us more about the significance of the stone author is searching for?
Yes. So in the story, there's a MacGuffin, which many fantasy readers are, of course, familiar with. A MacGuffin, just, an item that propels the story along. The MacGuffin in this story is called the Zohar Stone. And in Jewish mystic tradition, it is said to be this kind of stone of light that is bestowed upon Abraham. There's kind of conjecture about whether or not it's a physical stone, is it a metaphorical stone, what have you. In my story, it is physical, it's literal, and it is believed to bring people back from the dead. And so, yeah, and so our main antagonist, Rivka, who is an ex-Hasidic young woman, she wants to bring her deceased husband back to life. Her husband died during an exorcism at the hands of the Sanhedrin, who are this secret Jewish demon hunting order. And when her husband dies, she not only vows vengeance upon the Sanhedrin for allowing this to happen, but of course she wants her husband returned to her. So this story revolves around the seeking of this stone for her in order to retrieve her husband back. This puts her on at a cross purpose to our protagonist, who Arthur Rose, a secular Jewish guy, was in the Hasidim, a Hasidic ultra Orthodox Jew for his childhood, came out of that environment. He then learns that not only is he a part of this demon hunting order, his family are the keepers of this Zohar stone. So it puts Rivka and Arthur on this collision course as Arthur's uncovering his heritage and Rivka is trying to recover this stone from his family.
Okay.
Yeah.
Arthur Rose is described as a certified nerd.
Yes.
How did you develop his personality?
Well, yes. Well, that one was very easy because that's effectively me. I don't know if any listeners would be able to tell by now. I'm sure they will. But yes, a certified nerd is one of the first ways I would describe myself. There are differences. What I wanted to do is kind of play up his own, I don't want to use the word self-hatred, but his own antagonism towards his own Jewish faith. He associates, going back to what we were talking about earlier, he associates his Judaism not with the badassery, not with the swords and sandals epicness of Lord of the Rings or Beowulf or King Arthur. He doesn't see Jews in that space. And so he clings to these other models of strength and to these other stories without allowing his Judaism into them and into his own identity. So it's not just that he's a certified nerd. His nerddom is actually a shield that he's using to protect against his own feelings of inferiority and his own feelings of shame about what happens in his backstory and his connection to his Judaism.
Are there any side characters you particularly enjoyed writing?
Many, many. The one that stands out to me would probably be Zvi. So Zvi is a Hasidic Jewish teenager, and he effectively acts as Arthur's sidekick. He comes into the story about maybe a third of the way through, and he is effectively Arthur's sidekick, helping him get back in touch with his Jewish roots. But also, he's getting something from Arthur in return. He wants to learn how to play guitar. So Arthur plays guitar, and they exchange lessons in Hebrew for lessons in guitar playing. And Zvi is when my wife read him, she just put the book down and she said, Zvi's very cute. He's a very cute guy. He's a good boy, you know. He's 17. He's a little awkward. He's got a crush on a girl in his neighborhood, and he wants to impress her with the guitar. And this girl is not Jewish. So, of course, he has a lot of tensions between his Hasidic upbringing and this non-Jewish girl. As you might imagine, that leads to a lot of rich discussion and rich revelation for him as he journeys with Arthur through this story.
Okay. Can you break down how the Hebrew magic in your book works?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So in order to do that, I'll need to take a step back. In the Jewish mystic tradition, there is something called the Tree of Life. And the Tree of Life is basically these different worlds or emanations from the Godhead, from God, and different dimensions. And Sanhedrin can access different parts of the tree in order to access different magics. So you have spell casting from Torah, you have pacts with angels, you have the true names of objects and things, uncovering that. You have the healing arts, and of course you also have craftsmen and the infusion of magic into amulets and jewelry and to charms. And what's very cool about Arthur is that, as is typical with these Chosen One narratives, he is the inheritor of all these magics. So he turns out to be a chosen one who can access all parts of the tree, all the emanations, and he gets access to all of the magic, which is very, very cool.
Okay. What's one mystical element or piece of lore that you're particularly proud of incorporating?
I would say the angel Azazel. So Azazel in Jewish tradition is associated with the scapegoat myth. This idea that a goat would be sent out into the mountains to act as kind of like a symbol of the sins of a community and to let go of those sins. So it's literally a scapegoat to be sent out. Azazel is kind of associated with this myth. He's believed to be on this mountainside where the goats reside. And what's really fun in my story is that in my story, he is charged by God with giving weapons and metalworking to the earliest humans against God's wishes. So he's kind of charged for this crime and he's imprisoned up the tree of life in these upper dimensions. And so when Arthur needs to craft a sword, Arthur really wants to have a badass sword like an Excalibur. He goes to the higher levels of the tree, and Azazel is there, an angel bound for thousands of years in punishment for this crime. The two of them, he frees Azazel, and the two of them team up to create this badass sword. And I won't reveal any more than that, but taking Azazel, the character from myth, and kind of interpreting him through my lens was one of the most fun things I've done, I think.
Were there any challenges in balancing fantasy elements with real world history and faith?
Yes. So here, obviously, it's a Jewish story. It deals with actual Jewish faith, which means you're going to have people who hate it because they're going to see it as a challenge to their Judaism. And what I tried to do in this book is I tried to say the magic in it, the secret society in it, the history in it, the secret history of this group, they do not oppose a Jewish person's faith. They do not oppose a Jewish person's ritual or beliefs. It adds to it. It's just an addition. It's a fictional addition to all of these things that a person might take pride in, right? My intention with this book was not to insult anybody's religion, to insult anybody's faith, and to say, in fact, this faith and this creed and the dogma of Judaism can be translated in this book into different magics and good deeds and vanquishing evil. So it was meant to be a compliment. But of course, there are going to be people who, listen, they're more religious and they hear on its face, oh, like you're taking the Jewish mystic tradition and you're making a superhero out of that. That's offensive to me. And at the end of the day, I disagree, but I can't tell somebody, what to believe. And at the end of the day, I hope that the intention through the work carries through. I hope that the earnestness that a person sees in the work, they understand that my intention was not to step on anybody's faith, but to only enhance it, perhaps.
How does the Secret Order of the Demon Hunters operate? Do they have rules, rituals, or hierarchy?
Yeah, they have a hierarchy. So the Sanhedrin, what's cool about the Sanhedrin is that they are actually historical too. So the Sanhedrin are, of course, in history, they weren't actually demon hunters. They just don't exist. But the Sanhedrin in actual history were a Jewish judiciary body in ancient Israel, what was then called Judea. So they were a judiciary body made up of judges who would preside over the land and make decisions. The only addition I made is that they, by night, hunt demons in the defense of mankind, right? So by day, they're the judges. By night, they hunt demons. What this means is that in terms of hierarchy, I was actually able to take hierarchy from this order in real life. So for instance, the Hebrew Nasi, Nasi, that translates to president. And so the Sanhedrin would be ruled by a Ram Nasi, or a head president. In my story, the Nasi of the New York branch is a Ethiopian Jewish woman, and then around her are her Hamesh, her hand, the 5 lieutenants, as it were, who assist her in the different schools of magic. And then from there, you have a letter ranking in the order attached to the Hebrew alphabet. So if you are the right-hand man or woman of the Nasi, then you are Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet. If you're the second in command or second seat, then you're the Bet. If you're third seat, you're the Gimel, and on it goes back through the Hebrew alphabet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you create any original myths or spells for the book?
Yeah. Did I create any original myths and spells? So certainly when Torah verses are spouted out for spells, the effects of those spells were determined by me. So I guess that would be me creating them. Like, so I would look at a Torah verse and say, like, a perfect example is in Torah, Lot's wife looks back at Sodom and Gomorrah as they're being destroyed, these 2 cities of vice. And for those of you who might need to brush up on the Bible, Lot's wife looks back and she turns to salt, because if God said you shouldn't look at what this is, and Lot says to his wife, "Don't do this," and she turns to salt. So in my story, that scripture verse, when it's uttered, it can turn a demon into salt. right? So I was getting to play around with that. And then also a really cool thing that I especially enjoy is it's generally considered taboo to have a tattoo in the Jewish faith. By the way, as a quick aside, there's a rumor that if you have a tattoo, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery, which is just not true. That's like an old wives' tale that you can be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Anyway, so I said, okay, what if I invert that on its head? And the Sanhedrin who make pacts with angels, who make these deals with angels, what if they're granted a tattoo through the pact? So, for instance, my main character Arthur, when he makes that pact with Azazel and the two of them combine forces, he has this like sick, badass tattoo that is carved into inked into his back, from shoulders down to his tailbone, and it is like full of swirls and and like the weird shapes and everything. And I really love playing with that because I just think that Jews not being able to have tattoos or not should not be able to have tattoos. I think that's me personally kind of silly, and I actually think that tattoos can be kind of cool. So that was one invention I made.
Okay, did you outline the book extensively or did you discover the story as you wrote?
Yeah. The age old decision for any writer, right? Are you a plotter or a gardener? Discovery writer. I plotted. I plotted. In fact, I not only did I plot so much that I knew where I was going, I plotted so much that I don't know how discovery writers write. I don't. If I were to stare, and truly I applaud it, because if I was to stare at a blank screen and I didn't know where I was going that day, I would be utterly lost. I would be, and I think more importantly, I think I'd be second guessing myself every step of the way. I'd be going through every paragraph and being like, is this good? Is this true? Is this what I want to be saying with this story? Whereas if you plot, you do have that. There's no getting around that. But it's lessened considerably because you always know where you're going. And so you can then make the call, is this in service to the story? I know the story already. So is this paragraph, it doesn't feel true to me. Why? Well, because it's not serving the story in this or that way. So yes, I have many notes on it. I would probably say, as a quick estimate, I probably have anywhere between 50 to 60,000 words in notes. Which, for those listening who aren't writers, that I mean, when I think about it, it's like it kind of like actually gets into my own head. It's probably 150 pages of notes, something like that, right? But it helps, it helps. It keeps me on the course.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
Okay.
What
Good.
was the
Okay. Good.
what was the hardest scene to write?
The hardest scene to write. What was the hardest scene to write? Love scenes. Love scenes. And you're going to hear this, obviously, tons of people have heard this with fantasy writers, especially male ones. Love scenes are hard. It's one thing to say that, like, they serve the same role as action scenes, which is some truth should be revealed in them. Some character growth should be happening in them. That's all well and good, and you can understand that intellectually. But if you really have to sit there and think about the intimacy between two people, and making it convincing and true, that's hard. That's hard. What I ultimately settled on is when it came time for. I'm a teacher, so whenever sexy time stuff comes up, I go brown chicken, brown cow. But anytime there's some brown chicken, brown cow, when that comes up, I fade to black for the most part. I let the reader do most of the heavy lifting there. But the compromise I made is that doesn't mean you can't have tender, intimate moments that aren't necessarily sexual. So so Arthur's love interest is Lynn. Lynn is a woman very confident in herself, very confident in him. She wants to see him return to his Jewish identity and faith because she is, of course, very proud of her own. And she sees what he's going through. She doesn't know the full story because he has to keep it secret from her, but she can see that he's really going through this crisis of identity. And it's these really tender moments where the two of them are, let's say, in bed together after they've gotten intimate and they're talking through these issues, and it's like that I can do. I can write that because that's two people connecting and through dialogue saying what they believe and having those beliefs encounter one another. And what would happen when that happens? So yeah, the intimate scenes are the hardest, but you try to find a way around the perhaps the most tantalizing parts if you're not as confident in it.
Do you have a favorite line or moment in the book?
I do. It would spoil some of the book. Let me think of one. Let me think of one that Yeah. Okay. So going back to Lynn and Arthur, there's one that's not as spoilery. So, Lynn, of course, wants him to be proud of his Judaism. And so he says to her something along the lines of, I don't know if I could ever come back to my Judaism, right? He's really going through it. And she says, Arthur, that's the mistake you keep making, that you keep thinking you have to return to your Judaism. But the truth is you never left. And I remember writing that, and I remember thinking, God, that is exactly what she would say, and it's exactly what he needs to hear. And it was such a setup for what comes later in the climax of the book, which I won't give away, but needless to say, these feelings of one's relationship with their own identity and Arthur's relationship with his comes full circle in that climactic moment, and those words resonate really, really hard in that final moment for him.
How long did it take you to complete this novel?
Oh God. Uh, all right. So I mentioned before I started writing in 2018 with the release of Black Panther. Um, I wrote a draft that was much darker, much darker. It dealt with heavier themes. It dealt with real atrocity, and it wasn't working. And I had to start from scratch. I had written maybe 150 pages, 200 pages. Had to start from scratch, wrote it through. This would have been around COVID, so this would have been around 2020 to 2021. I wrote it through. It was good. It wasn't where I wanted it to be, so I made the decision to just start again. I realized that there were a lot of the edits I wanted to make. I said, I want another crack at this. I want to do this one more time straight through. It'll be quicker because I know the story. I know exactly where I'm going. And it was. I got through it by the end of 2022. So we're now at 4 years of writing, three drafts. I had written straight through that third draft and from scratch. And by the end of 2022, it was ready for submission to publishers. So I think that puts us at about 4 years of writing, or give or take 4.5 maybe.
Did you encounter any major changes from the first draft to the final draft?
Yeah. So as I said before, the first draft was very dark, very heavy. And I can talk about it now because it doesn't make it to the final book. But basically, the first iteration dealt with abuse in the Hasidic community, and originally that was going to be the kind of the darkness at the heart of Arthur's relationship with his Judaism. And while it's not important, and while it's not marginal, right? It felt too heavy a burden for a story like this to carry. And frankly, too heavy of a burden for me to carry. I'm a secular Jew. I was not raised in the Hasidic tradition. I'm a visitor to Hasidic learning, to the Hasidic way of life. And if I was going to write a main character who came out of the Hasidim, and I was going to really go there with some of the dark things that we sometimes see coming out of that community, it wasn't a fit. It wasn't going well. And so I changed the backstory a little bit. I changed the degree, the severity of the crime, so to speak, and the darkness at the heart of it. And I said, this book doesn't deserve to be so burdened. So it's a more joyous book in the second iteration. It's a more inquisitive, badass, like I said before, iteration, less weighed down by these really heavy accusations of what sometimes goes down in not just, well, first of all, not just in any community, but of course the Hasidic community, right? So it happens across the board. I'm not saying anything that's unique to Hasidic Jews by any stretch, but I didn't want it to be the focal point of this book.
Okay. How's the response been from the readers so far?
Good. It's been pretty wild to see, going back to talking about, the Hasidim and the different range of Jewish experience. What readers have really been in touch with the most and have appreciated the most is that range of Jewish experience, which is what I wanted to showcase. So, I've had people say to me, wow, that's so cool that you have an Ethiopian Jewish woman at the head of this order. Of course, the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jewish community, is one that is, of course, very important, is becoming more and more known by more and more people around the world. You have secular Jews, you have religious Jews, you have half Jewish, half not Jewish people. That's a major theme of the sequel that I'm working on now, but they're present in the first book as well. And so people have really, I think, been impressed by that diversity within the Jewish community. I do think there have been one or two people. It's been very positive generally, but of course we're writers, so we focus on the one or two negative criticisms, right? So it's we can't help it. Um,
Right.
so I saw a one star review, and I was like, oh boy, here we go, buckle up. And so I read it, and truthfully, there was a one criticism that was good, which was there were some parts of it that felt like there was not enough learning about the mystic tradition. And I said, you know what? There's always more to learn. But this reviewer was rattling off a few things that I hadn't heard of yet. And I said, okay, I'm going to get on that right now. Like there were very good points in that review. But generally, yeah, it's been really exciting to see the celebration of that diversity, and from secular and religious Jews. I got an email from a Hasidic Jew in my inbox a few months ago. I was blown away. They're like, I loved it. Like, the way that you have these Hasidic characters in here is great. The non-religious characters are, they're good too. But like, as a Hasidic Jew, I resonated with the Hasidim. I was like, wow, that's what higher praise can you get if you're not coming from a community and you put that out into the world, right? So but it's been special. It's been really special.
Do you see this book as a standalone, or do you have plans for a sequel series?
Yeah, so I mentioned I'm hard at work on the sequel as we speak. I'm about maybe 40% through it. 40. I mean, God, I wish I was higher, but about 40%. The book was signed on with my publisher as a 3-book deal. So I actually have a sequel and a third book locked in, which is great. I kind of want this series to go for maybe 7 or 8 books. There's a part of me that really wants it to be 7, so you can mirror like the 7 days of the week and creation with the 7 books. You know what I mean? And then maybe I get to rest, like maybe like God rested after the 7th day, or on the 7th day, and maybe I could rest after that too. That'd be really sick after the 7th book. But yeah, I could very easily see it be turning into a huge series. The first 3 books I have pretty much planned out. The 4th book is pretty well defined in my head, and then 5, 6, 7, like it's a bit murkier, but I know where I would take it for sure.
Okay. What advice would you give to writers who want to blend mythology and modern storytelling?
What advice would I want to give for people who want to do this? What is your angle? Is the question I would ask these writers, right? What is your thesis? A lot of storytellers, they think that they're just writing a story, and look, we all are. At the end of the day, a story is a story. It's entertainment. You get what you can from it, and you hope that it resonates. But I think the best stories are also the best lessons. Even if you don't want to be listen, no writer wants to be a teacher in the book. They just like, pandering to somebody, or like, knocking them over the head with a lesson. But if you know what your theme is, if you know what you're trying to say, then everything else from the story flows from that. At least the way I see story. The first thing I need to understand if I'm going to put pen to page is the theme. What am I trying to say? What am I trying to think about? And what do I want other people thinking about as they make their way through my story and turn that final page?
Okay. If your book was adapted into a movie or a
Mm,
TV show, who would you cast as Arthur?
okay. uh, yeah. So this is an interesting one. First of all, if it got adapted into a TV show or movie, I don't know what I would do. I'd probably like donate tons of money. I would just thank God. Like, I'd do whatever I could do to reciprocate the universe. That would be awesome. Um, who would play Arthur? So Arthur is described as he's not a bad looking guy. So it would have to be somebody not listen. He's not an Adonis. You know what I mean? We're talking about an everyman. So it's not, we're not going to have Chris Hemsworth up there. I could see like, so Brett Goldstein is a little old, the actor Brett Goldstein, but kind of like a Brett Goldstein mold, a little younger, and perhaps not having the beard, because of course when the story begins, Arthur associates the beard and the payas, the curls going down by the ears, with his Hasidic upbringing. So he doesn't have the payas, the curls by the ears. He doesn't have the beard on purpose. Over the course of the story, he lets his beard grow out. But the Brett Goldstein sans beard, and a little younger, that would be perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so where can people find your book?
Oh yeah, everywhere. Everywhere. Thank God, right? So Amazon, it's available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes and Noble, Thrift Books, Walmart, virtually wherever you buy your book, wherever you buy your books. Indie Book at Histria.com. Histria is my publisher. Shout out to Histria. You can find it at Histria.com. But I believe it's on every major retailer site for wherever you buy your books. It should be there. And if it's not, it's somewhere else. It's just it's one click away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
Yeah. So I am at JS Gold Author on Instagram and TikTok. You can also find me at JS Gold on Facebook. And my Substack, my blog, is also at JS Gold Author. In fact, I'm going to double check that right now just to make sure that that's the same. What is my Substack handle? JS Gold Author. JS Gold Author. So I try to put out a blog once a month. A blog post once a month, and I try to put out a video on my socials maybe once a week or more. I try to stay engaged with my audience. You sift through a lot of the bots telling me that I'm a bad Jewish person, which is, we don't have to get into that, but I try to ignore the bots and try to engage with tons of fans.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have today, guys. I want to thank JS for coming on.
Of course, and
Thank
thank
you.
you for having. Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk shop.
Okay. Well, guys, next week we'll be back with Writers Talk, and that's going to do it. So always remember, writing is a journey, not a race, and I'll see you guys next Sunday. I'm going to cut this part out.
Mm-hmm.
Either the episode's going to come out either tomorrow or Monday.
Okay.
And I will send you a link for Spotify.
Yeah, great. That's awesome. Okay. I love, and by the way, I love what you're doing here. This is fantastic. Like, just getting authors out of their shell, talking about the process. It's really important work. I appreciate it.
Well, I try to cater to the authors that are using writing as a hobby, like hobbyists, and like the newbie writers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's all. But I will get when I put I will send you the links for everything once they're up. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And before you close out of the app,
Yes.
make sure it's all the way uploaded, okay?
Yes, you got it. It says 99% right now.
Okay, so when it says uploaded, then you can close out or do whatever, okay?
Okay.
All right, well, thank you, Jeremy, for coming on, okay?
Thank you so much, Janae. Thank you. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, okay?
Bye.
Have a good rest of the weekend, okay?
Yes, of course. You as well. You as well.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.